somewhere between India and Tibet, in a narrow corridor of land that most people could not place on a map, a civilization learned to live vertically. On cliff edges, on ridge lines, on mountain passes where the air holds barely enough oxygen to sustain a flame. Nepal is not a country in the conventional sense. It is a compression of extremes. In the south, jungle lowlands near sea level, where Bengal tigers move through tall grass and one-horned rhinoceroses wade through river channels in the morning mist. In the north, 8 of the world's 10 tallest mountains, a wall of stone and ice that does not suggest boundary so much as it announces one. Between those two worlds, ancient trade routes carved into gorges deeper than the Grand Canyon, monasteries balanced on cliff faces with no visible means of support, villages suspended above clouds that move beneath them like weather below weather, and a people who did not conquer this landscape, who learned, over centuries of adaptation, to become part of it. Nepal was never colonized. No empire successfully held it. No foreign power reshaped it. The mountains enforced an independence that politics alone could not have guaranteed. And in that isolation, something rare was preserved. A civilization shaped entirely by its geography, a spirituality embedded in its stone, a people defined by what the mountains required of them. This is not simply a country, it is a civilization humanity was never supposed to build. To understand this place, you have to start with 3 things most people never hear about. 1. The mountains that water half a continent. The Himalayas are not scenery. They are the most consequential mountain range on Earth. The glaciers here feed the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Indus, the Mekong, and the Yangtze, river systems that sustain nearly 2 billion people across South and Southeast Asia. The monsoon patterns that determine whether crops grow or fail across the Indian subcontinent are shaped, in part, by the Himalayan wall. Those glaciers are now retreating. The water systems they feed are changing. What happens in Nepal's mountains does not stay in Nepal's mountains. Two, the nation the world could not conquer. Nepal is one of the few countries in Asia that was never colonized. The British Empire, which held dominion over the entire Indian subcontinent surrounding Nepal, could not hold this land. The Gurkha warriors who defended it became so feared and so respected that the British eventually did the only thing they could. They started recruiting them. Gurkha soldiers have served in the British Army for over 200 years. They are still serving. The mountains did not just protect Nepal's land. They forged a human identity that no outside force has ever fully broken. Three, where the human body reaches its limit. Communities in Nepal's high Himalayan regions live at elevations above 14,000 feet, where the air contains roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. The Sherpa people who inhabit these altitudes carry genetic adaptations, measurable differences in how their bodies process oxygen, that developed over generations of living where most humans cannot function. These are not simply mountain guides. They are the product of thousands of years of adaptation to an environment that the human body was not originally designed to survive. Nepal is where geography rewrote biology. The wall that created a civilization. From space, the Himalayas look like a scar. A long, curved ridge of white running east to west across the upper edge of the Indian subcontinent. A wound in the Earth's surface left by a collision that began 50 million years ago and has not stopped. The Indian tectonic plate is still moving north, still pressing into the Eurasian plate, still driving rock skyward. The Himalayas are not an old mountain range in the geological sense. They are young, violently, actively young. They are still rising. Everest grows by a small but measurable amount each year. The earthquakes that regularly strike Nepal are not reminders of ancient instability. They are evidence of a collision still in progress. 8 of the world's 10 tallest mountains exist within or along Nepal's borders. Everest, Kanchenjunga, Lhotse, Makalu, Cho Oyu, Dhaulagiri, Manaslu, Annapurna. Their summits reach heights where jet aircraft fly, where the sky begins to shade toward the dark edge of space, where a human being without supplemental oxygen will begin to die within hours. But the mountains are not only record holders, they are architects. They blocked the advance of empires. They redirected rivers. They created weather systems that determined where civilizations could grow on both sides of the range. They forced the people who chose to live among them into a specific kind of intelligence, practical, patient, and deeply attuned to forces much larger than themselves. Every village in Nepal, every monastery, every trade route, every cultural tradition exists in direct relationship to what the mountains allow and what they refuse. The civilization did not happen despite the geography. The civilization is the geography, expressed in human form. The people who live above the clouds. At Namche Bazaar, a trading settlement carved into the side of a Himalayan ridge at over 11,000 feet, the weekly market has been happening for centuries. Goods arrive by foot, by yak, and increasingly by helicopter. Traders from villages higher in the mountains descend to exchange what the altitude grows for what it cannot. Potatoes, yak butter, dried meat, fabric, phone chargers. The elevation here would qualify as a medical concern for most visitors within hours of arrival. For the Sherpa people, it is simply Tuesday. The Sherpa are not simply high-altitude porters, a reputation earned through generations of supporting mountaineering expeditions that the outside world tends to remember as the achievements of their clients. They are a people whose ancestors migrated from the Tibetan plateau centuries ago and settled in the Khumbu Valley, at elevations that forced a biological negotiation between the human body and the mountain atmosphere. Research has confirmed what observation already suggested. Sherpa physiology differs measurably from low-altitude populations. Their bodies produce nitric oxide more efficiently. Their muscles extract oxygen from thin air in ways that non-adapted populations cannot replicate regardless of training. This is not simply conditioning. It is inheritance, written into blood and tissue over thousands of years. Above Namche, the villages become smaller and the trails steeper. Dingboche, Labuche, Gorak Shep. Children walk these paths to school. Elderly villagers carry loads that trained mountaineers would find difficult at sea level. The mountains did not break these people. They built them. Where the mountains become sacred. In Nepal, a mountain is not a mountain. It is a deity. Everest is called Sagamatha in Nepali, the forehead of the sky. In Tibetan, it is Chomolungma, goddess mother of the world. The name given to it by Western cartographers in 1865 is the one most of the world uses. The names given by the people who lived beneath it for thousands of years are older and carry more of the truth. The monasteries of the Khumbu region were not built for tourism. They were built because the mountains required them. Before any major Everest expedition leaves base camp, the climbers, regardless of nationality, regardless of religion, attend a puja ceremony. Monks from Tengboche or nearby monasteries perform blessings. Offerings are burned. The mountain is asked for permission. This is not superstition, it is respect. The accumulated wisdom of people who understand at a cellular level that the mountain does not care about human ambition. At Buddhanath in Kathmandu, one of the largest Buddhist stupas in the world rises above the rooftops of a city that presses against its base from all sides. Pilgrims circle it clockwise, always clockwise, spinning prayer wheels with one hand, lips moving with mantras absorbed since childhood. The eyes painted on the four sides of the stupa face outward in each direction. They have been watching the valley for over 1,500 years. Nepal's spirituality does not exist alongside daily life. It is the structure daily life is built upon. The bells are not ceremonial, they are continuous. The prayers are not scheduled, they are constant. The mountains made this necessary. When you live where the earth can kill you in an afternoon, you develop a relationship with forces larger than yourself. Or you do not survive long enough to develop anything at all. The city where gods still walk. Descend from the mountains, come into the valley, Kathmandu. From a distance, the valley looks ancient and contained, a bowl of civilization held in place by surrounding ridges. Up close, it is something more complicated. Ancient temple squares crowd against mobile phone shops. Sacred cows sit in traffic that has no logic and no resolution. Incense smoke from 1,000 shrine niches mixes with motorcycle exhaust in alleyways narrow enough that two people passing must turn sideways. Durbar Square, or what remains of it after the 2015 earthquake rearranged history, contains pagoda temples built in the 12th century, carved from wood and stone by craftsmen whose names were never recorded. At the Pashupatinath temple complex, on the banks of the Bagmati River, cremation platforms have been burning continuously since the 5th century. Families bring their dead, priests attend, the river receives the ash. Tourists watch from the opposite bank, separated by the width of the water and, in some ways, by a much wider distance than that. In a courtyard in central Kathmandu, a small girl sits at a window. She is the Kumari, the living goddess. Chosen from among young girls of the Newar community through a rigorous selection process that tests for specific physical characteristics and emotional composure, she is considered a living vessel of the goddess Teleju from the time of her selection until she reaches puberty. She does not attend school in the conventional sense. She does not walk the streets freely. On certain holy days, she is carried through the city in a chariot and receives the blessing touch of the head of state. The tradition has continued for centuries. The current political system of Nepal is barely a decade old in its present form. In Kathmandu, the ancient and the modern do not simply coexist. They negotiate, daily, imperfectly, without resolution. The Forgotten Kingdom of Mustang. Drive north from Kathmandu. The landscape changes within hours. The green hills give way to drier terrain. The air lightens. The road, where there is one, becomes a narrow track pressed against cliff faces above river gorges so deep their floors are invisible. Upper Mustang does not look like Nepal. It looks like Tibet, because for most of its history it was a Tibetan kingdom, operating as a semi-autonomous territory with its own king, its own language, its own trade relationships, and its own cosmology. The kingdom of Lo existed for over 500 years. It sat on one of the most important trade routes connecting Tibet to the Indian subcontinent, a route along which salt, grain, wool, and religious texts moved in both directions, and along which the culture of the high plateau seeped southward and the influences of the lowlands seeped north. Nepal opened Upper Mustang to outside visitors only in 1992. Entry still requires a special permit. The number of visitors is controlled. In the cliffs surrounding Lo Mantang, the walled capital, there are caves. Not natural caves, engineered ones. Cut into the rock face at heights that would require ropes and technical climbing to reach today. Inside, fragments of painted murals, human bones, objects that suggest occupation going back 3,000 years or more. Who lived here? Why at this height? How did they reach these openings? The answers are not fully known. Archaeologists have been working these sites for decades and have produced theories but not certainties. The cliffs hold more than they have yet released. Mustang is a reminder that the Himalayas have been sheltering human stories for far longer than the records suggest, and that many of those stories are still waiting inside the rock. Where Buddha entered the world. Move south, away from the mountains, into the flat, warm lowlands of Nepal's Terai region. The landscape here could not be more different from the Khumbu or Mustang. The sky is wide and unobstructed. The air is thick with moisture. Birds call from trees that have no business growing at altitude. In a garden in the town of Lumbini, surrounded by the monastic complexes of 20 different countries, each one an architectural expression of how Buddhism was translated as it spread across Asia, there is a simple, ancient structure. The Maya Devi Temple. Inside it, beneath a protective enclosure, is a stone, a marker. It indicates the precise location where, in the 5th century BCE, a child was born who would become Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. What emerged from this ground, from this specific location in the Nepali lowlands, is one of the most consequential philosophical and spiritual systems in human history. Buddhism today has between 500 million and 600 million practitioners worldwide. Its ethical frameworks have influenced legal systems, artistic traditions, psychological research, and the internal lives of people who have never sat in a monastery or visited a temple. The concept of mindfulness, now practiced in hospitals, corporations, and school systems across the Western world, traces its origin through a lineage that leads here, to this garden, to this stone, to a child born in a land most of the world cannot find on a map. Nepal is not a country that exists at the margins of human civilization. It is a country from whose center one of civilization's most lasting ideas spread outward across the entire world. the jungle where rhinos still roam. This is still Nepal. It requires a moment to accept. The traveler who arrived from Mustang's red canyons or Khumbu's glaciers is now standing in subtropical lowland that has more in common visually with the Serengeti than with anything else encountered in this country. Chitwan National Park sits in Nepal's southern lowlands, a protected expanse of tall grassland, riverine forest and oxbow lakes that has survived because the government and conservation community drew a line around it and held it. Inside that line, the greater one-horned rhinoceros, one of the great conservation recoveries of the 20th century, brought back from a population of fewer than 100 animals to over 600 through protection and political will. Bengal tigers move through these forests. Their presence is felt more than seen. A pug mark in river mud, a half-eaten kill at the forest edge, the particular silence that falls over a landscape when an apex predator is nearby and every other creature knows it. Elephants are here too, used for conservation patrol in the park, in a relationship between humans and animals that stretches back centuries in this region. The contrast between Chitwan's lowland jungle and the Himalayan world above is not incidental to Nepal's identity. It is the point. A country that contains both a Bengal tiger prowling through subtropical grass and a snow leopard hunting at 18,000 feet, and everything between them is not simply a mountain destination. It is an entire world compressed into a single border. The villages the modern world never reached. There are parts of Nepal where the 20th century arrived late, and the 21st has not fully arrived yet. Dolpo, a remote district in Nepal's northwest, bordering Tibet, sitting at an average elevation of over 13,000 feet, receives almost no tourists. It has almost no roads. It has communities that survive through a combination of high-altitude agriculture, animal husbandry, and trade with Tibet that follows routes older than any written record of them. salt from the Tibetan plateau, grain from the lower valleys, moving in opposite directions, carried by mules or by human backs, along paths that follow the logic of terrain rather than the convenience of distance. In these villages, the annual cycle of survival is still largely what it has always been. Crops planted in the brief, warm months. Animals moved to higher pastures when the lower ones are in use. Winter endured inside stone structures built to hold warmth against temperatures that fall well below zero. The children who grow up here understand altitude, weather, and animal behavior with a precision that no classroom could teach. They understand because the alternative to understanding is not inconvenience, it is death. But Dolpo and villages like it face a pressure that has nothing to do with avalanches or altitude. The young are leaving. The cities, Kathmandu, Pokhara, the labor markets of the Gulf and Southeast Asia, offer money, connectivity, and a version of life the mountains do not. The villages grow older. The knowledge encoded in those communities about plants, weather, roots, repairs, rituals exists in fewer and fewer minds each decade. What is being lost is not only a way of life, it is a library that took centuries to write, and there is no digital backup. The Mountains of Myth. At 14,400 feet in the Langtang region, a lake sits in a bowl of rock and sky. Gosai Kunda. According to Hindu mythology, the god Shiva struck the earth here with his trident to release water after consuming the poison that threatened to destroy the world. The lake formed in the depression. It has been sacred ever since. Every year during the festival of Janai Purnima, tens of thousands of pilgrims make the journey to its shore. Not by helicopter, on foot. Across passes that require significant altitude gain, in weather that can change from clear to lethal within an hour. They come because the mountain requires it, because the obligation is older than the difficulty. The Yeti lives in the Himalayas, or it does not. The debate in Western scientific circles occupies a different register than the conversation in the villages. For many communities in the high Himalayan regions, the creature is not a legend awaiting confirmation. It is simply part of the landscape, another inhabitant of the altitudes above the tree line, rarely seen, occasionally encountered, best left undisturbed. Whether or not the Yeti exists in the biological sense may be the wrong question. The more interesting question is what it tells us that communities surviving at the edge of human endurance have always believed that something larger and more powerful than themselves shared the most extreme reaches of their landscape. The mountains hold things. Some of them we have named, some of them we have not. In Nepal, the line between mythology and geography is not a line at all. It is a prayer flag, moving constantly, connecting the stone below to the sky above. Never still, never fixed. The civilization suspended between earth and sky. Return to altitude, to the place where the air thins and the mind clarifies, and the scale of things becomes, finally, honest. From here, from a ridge above the clouds in the Khumbu, or the Annapurna, or the Langtang, the entire country arranges itself below. The jungle at the southern edge, the river valleys running between the hills, the terraced fields cut into slopes at angles that defy expectation, the ancient trade routes connecting markets that existed before any government drew lines around them, the monasteries, the cremation fires, the glacier lakes, the red cliffs of Mustang, the walled garden in Lumbini where an idea began that still travels. The villages, the children on the paths. These are not separate stories. They are the same story. A story about what happens when humans encounter geography that does not accommodate weakness and choose to stay anyway. Nepal did not build a civilization and then find its spirituality. It built its spirituality because the civilization required it. When you live on cliff edges, when every winter is survival, when the mountain can end you on an ordinary afternoon, you either develop a relationship with forces larger than yourself, or you do not maintain a culture across generations. The prayer flags are not decoration. They are a conversation between the people below and the forces above that has been running without interruption for centuries. The mountains do not change for humans. Humans changed themselves to survive the mountains. And in doing so, they built something that most of the world was too comfortable to need. A civilization shaped by necessity into something that looks, from a distance, like wisdom. Nepal is not a destination. It is a reckoning. A civilization built vertically, into cliffs, into cloud, into the last thin edge of air the atmosphere provides, by people who had no other choice and made of that necessity something extraordinary. The mountains are still rising. The prayers are still rising with them. The villages at the edge of survival still hold. There are still places on this earth where humanity lives in direct negotiation with nature. Nepal is one of the last. Subscribe to Worldly and keep exploring the worlds most people never truly see.